Welcome to Global Azure Virtual 2020 UK and Ireland event. My name is Sasha and I'm a Cloud Solution Architect with the Customer Success Unit. Customer success is all about ensuring customers achieve their desired outcomes while using Microsoft products and services. The title of this talk is May You Live in Interesting Times. May you live in interesting times is, according to Wikipedia, an English translation of a Chinese curse, an expression which is used ironically. Life is better in uninteresting times, times of peace, times of tranquility, rather than in interesting ones, which are usually times of trouble. On the left of these slides, you will find flavor text and links to help you learn more about the topics discussed. You can ignore these while watching the video, but you can pause the video at any time to read through. And following the links will be easier if you download the PDF file with all the slides, text, and links. On the right side is the area to focus on during the video playback. This talk is all about the tips I've collated from my recent customer interactions. How recent? Well, the events in the past few weeks and months. I'm sure you are aware how our lives have changed as of lately. These tips will try and help you avoid some of the most common pitfalls I've seen working with top Azure customers during these troubling times. None of them should surprise you, but I've seen them overlooked so often it's worth quickly reminding yourself of them. And if some of them are surprising, I'll be more than happy to discuss. At the end, there will be a way for you to tell me how useful this was, as well as share what you have seen and what tips you can share as well. May you live in interesting times indeed. The first tip is all about the established processes. I am sure there are established processes in your organization for planning, developing, deploying, storing data, scaling, securing, backing up, monitoring, and automating Azure services and workloads. I'm also sure that there will be a temptation to subvert, undermine, or work around those processes. Try and resist that temptation. The processes are there for a reason. There is a huge amount of experience that sits behind them, and bad things can and will happen if you sidestep them. So don't. Also, do follow all the prescriptive recommendations and practices as published on our docs pages. Next tip is all about scaling, and scaling old school. Take your average environment. It does what it needs to, and it does it well. Well, now there is a need to scale. So you can, for example, show the COVID-19 information, as that is now in huge demand. What you may rush to do is scale your environment as is. But is this really needed, or is there potentially a better solution? What if, instead of scaling the whole thing, you only scale the piece that will be in huge demand, and leave the rest of the environment as is, still ready to scale, but nowhere near what would be required if you were to scale it all? Instead of users going to your default homepage, the homepage is now the COVID-19 info, which everyone now wants. There is also a link to the rest of the environment for those who really need it, which will be a lot smaller number of users. The users land on COVID-19 info, and only those that require info outside of it will be redirected to your general environment. COVID-19 here is just an example. This might be anything really, perhaps a new product or a game launch or a PR response to a marketing blunder or any other piece of highly sought information. And by highly sought, I mean thousands of millions of times more interesting at the moment than everything else you're offering. If you do need to scale though, it's usually better to scale out rather than scale up. Scaling up means resizing the environment so it's larger, as in it has more resources available for it, be it CPU, memory, I/O, storage. Scale out, on the other hand, means duplicating and multiplying the resource, so there is more of them. For example, instead of having one virtual machine that scales up, so it has more memory, you scale out so there is more than one virtual machine. And usually, these multiple resources are based on the same template and are interchangeable among each other. So a response from one will be the same as from any other. Managing state is very important here, and stateless resources are better than stateful. I'll leave you to research these concepts on your own if you need to. So, we are massively scaling out. Excellent. Another tip here is related to the common scale-out scenarios I've seen with our customers. The default is always +1 of any resource that is scaling. Virtual machines, app service environment, you name it. This really shouldn't be the default and needs to be revisited as soon as possible if the environment now needs to massively scale to meet the demand. Why? Because scaling by one is slow, likely too slow for the traffic that is about to descend on the service. Imagine a pandemic-type scenario, I know, quite unlikely, and imagine the government publishes a site where one can schedule to receive an eventual vaccine. Do you think that site will see a trickle or a deluge of traffic? Seconds after the URL appears on everyone's screen in the country and in everyone's social media timeline. Remember also bots, the bad guys, and just various random people curious because they are scared and or bored at home will also be visiting. So you might need to scale by a lot, all at once. Also, you can scale in advance to announcement in this case, but there might be cases where this gets sprung onto you without a lot of coordination, which does happen. On the other hand, you should slowly scale in. As traffic falls off, you should slowly decrease your scale units to accommodate the incoming traffic reduction and save some money as well. You can of course do manual adjustments. But even after that first announcement, and even if you do have advanced coordination, people will react to the news in unpredictable ways. So you may need to stay ahead of these events and plan for scaling operations. You might scale by 2000% or more, especially from the minimum number of scale units. There is a lot of strategy involved in these operations, depending on how long it takes a unit of scale to come online, single seconds versus dozens of minutes and beyond, depending on advanced knowledge of impeding traffic, depending on available resources, and so on. One method that helps with these decisions can be caching, and caching as much as possible. Caching data is fairly common, as is caching static resources, but extending these to smarter scenarios is very important. Perhaps you need to replicate the data, potentially using services like Cosmos DB, and cache it as well. Perhaps you need to extend these into an overall global pattern, such as the geode pattern, that moves resources closer to customers, but can also introduce a lot of caching layers between your expensive resources and the customers. Another pattern is decoupling intensive tasks, and we've seen that used in common scenarios like video encoding and streaming. But that can be a powerful pattern in a lot more cases and helps mitigate unpredictable peaks of traffic. Take 3 examples that can be done in real time, but should they? COVID-19 scheduling, image thumbnail creation, and querying the database. In all 3 examples, you can be smart at what you're doing. In all 3 cases, you can offload a task and return a status endpoint to be checked in the future. Perhaps even with a parameter that tells the request how far in the future the service expects to have the result, so check the endpoint at that time. And the response will either be ready or will give another estimate on when to retry. In the examples I've given here, even that might not be needed, as you can send an SMS to confirm the COVID test time, do nothing after creating thumbnail images, they will just show up after a while, and in case of querying the database, send an email with a generated report if that was an intensive task that needed to be decoupled. Also, remember the caching options from before? If a query needs not to be in real time, cache it for a while. Even a few minutes will help with the load of the system. One thing I've run into again and again and again is logging and analytics either completely missing or turned off. And when confronted with a question, what is going on? I can only respond with, you must be joking. Prices here are illustrative only, but even so, for a global, critical, in-demand system, logging needs to be on. 2 million API calls for $12, 1 terabytes of hot storage for $200, and 100 million write operations for under $0.25, and 1 billion messaging operations for $200. There is just no excuse for this kind of system not to have this on at all times. And archiving, deletion, rotation, and other patterns are there to save you even more money. Do not also underestimate the value of some of this data for the ML and AI models. Not to mention, when asked, every organization is doing DevOps and DevSecOps, as a logical question might be then, how? How are you doing any sort of dev or ops or security without data on everything from usage and performance to security? Application Insights is a great service that exists to help developers with tracking activities and processes of their applications, so make use of it. Stop the rollout of new features during these times. Be smart. Focus on what is important. It is more important to keep your services up and running than it is to introduce new potential disruptions into the running services. Of course, this does not apply for services designed to directly help with the ongoing crisis, whatever it may be, but it is still better to introduce them as a separate service rather than including it into existing ones and potentially breaking something there. This tip does not apply to the rollout of security patches. Likely this didn't need to be said, but just making sure it is understood. In today's interconnected world, there will be a demand for some services by a lot of requesters. You need to have separate, priority-based paths to those services. Not every request is of the same priority, and some might need to be processed later, delayed, or dropped altogether. You can do these through patterns such as priority queues, with some queues getting prioritized over others, or dropped altogether. Throttling is another pattern, but one that needs to be considered before it is needed, as it might not be as easy throttling live traffic with 100% effectiveness. Similarly, not all your services need to be online with the same criticality. For example, in e-commerce processing, the shopping cart might be more important than displaying wish lists. So in case of emergency, a pattern that kills a wishlist service temporarily while prioritizing resources for the shopping cart service should be established. Distributed denial of service protection is a must. Why? Because we live in a complex geopolitical world, but also in a world of hackers, trolls, and jokers. So if your service is popular, it will be popular with bad actors too. One other reason is asymmetric technology requirements to attack and defend a network system. While the attacker can flood the system with a lot of traffic from a limited scope of resources, the defender has a much more difficult task of separating legitimate from the attacked traffic, and it may very well look identical at first glance. There is a service in Azure that can help, and it gives you unprecedented access to the scale and elasticity of global Azure presence itself, to rapid response teams and protection against unplanned resources cost. And if your service going down means deaths or a panicked population, you must stay up. Plan for failures, all of them, including the ones not under your control. Everything that can fail will at some point, and everything can fail. So plan. Then plan some more, because you've missed some things. Then get your Microsoft account team involved to assist you further, with planning for things you didn't think of. But we have, because we have seen it, either with our own services or with our customers. And what you do in the event of failure is as important as preventing failures. Do you cache, generalize, delay, stop access, use an alternative service, strip to bare bones functionality, change communication modes? You will also need to protect yourself and help protect others from either their own failures or your own failures. During the good times, services get built with expecting millisecond responses and fail completely with anything over a few seconds. During the good times, services can scale and handle 1 or 1 million requests a second, but 1 billion completely destroys them. And in some of these cases, you can shoot yourself and others in the foot with your well-meaning retry policies, with your health checks, with your dependencies on services that were never supposed to have been down, that are no longer there, and so on. And now you DDoS each other. You recover only to be taken down by a service queue that isn't even important but is still sending requests. And so, a down event of potential minutes to recover can get extended to days and weeks. And usually, cascade failures is not something someone without a whole lot of experience can plan for and execute well without a whole lot of planning, testing, And let's be honest, without a lot of failure. When you fail, you learn, but in a crisis mode, that can be very costly. Remember, people's literal lives might be at stake. Distributed systems are hard. Critical distributed systems are orders of magnitude harder. And while in the software reliability engineering world, the goal is continuous learning in a blameless culture where failure is expected and normalized while working towards continuous improvement, in the areas of politics, law, and just human conscience, they might not be. And in the crisis, everyone comes together and tries to do their absolute best. Staying mindful of these tips is critical, as learning from the failures of others is a bit less painful. There is remote working going on. There used to be remote working, there is now, but there will be a lot more of it, and then more of it after that. Planning for this is a part of a discipline called not going out of business, or business continuity. We are fortunate in Microsoft, and I hope you are in your organizations, that we have tools in place to enable working from home, or from anywhere really. That doesn't come all by itself. There is a lot of strategy and planning behind it, and while it is great to have the time to do the strategy and planning, in crisis this might not be possible. Falling back on proven and trusted technologies to rapidly deploy them for the need to work from home is key. Azure Windows Virtual Desktop and Microsoft Teams have seen their usage increased by orders of magnitude over the past few weeks and months. And between these two technologies and your trusted browser, you can work safely and securely from anywhere. Doctors can see patients, IT departments can coordinate, techies can prepare presentations and participate in conferences, and so on. Try to get into the habit of setting up and using group aliases instead of individual emails in all places except one-to-one communication. Email, Azure tags, signing up for third-party services, it will make your user management so much easier, reaching people easier, and moving people and information as they lean in and extend their roles to help out in a crisis. Redundancy is then built in rather than forced in when needed. One anti-pattern we've seen is a low level of communication between teams and departments in an organization. Prioritizing across departments is important, as one department might have a critical need that trumps another department's prior ones. So having that planning in place is much better than having people being dragged into different teams or tasks because it has priority, with them being clueless on architecture and business needs. Everything has limits, especially in a shared environment. Remembering that there are quotas and limits only when faced with an informational message about it is too little too late. Some limits in Azure are soft, some can be lifted automatically with a request, but there are some that will make you go back to the drawing board and consider the word sharding. Azure is huge, and it is increasingly unlikely you will need sharding, but at these scales you just might need to. Planning for that is better than retrofitting it in. When failures do happen and you need to fail over, be careful how you do it. Plan for it, test it. But also plan and test how you fail back to your default position. Also, if it is not necessary, do not fail back immediately when you can, but stabilize and schedule carefully when you will execute that. You do not want to be in a position where you failed unnecessarily because of your internal failback process that was executed too early or poorly thought out. Security operations, like spies, must flow, but remember that you can plan for and control those operations, and you should. While security operations should rarely impact general operation of the service, they might, and that might can quickly turn to certainty when in a crisis mode and resources are strained already. So never stop, but schedule, plan, and know exactly what the impact will be. In crisis, you will always need to cobble things together, link services, add communication layers, or create a new functionality, be it storing, processing, or reporting. How you go about this is the difference between helping with the crisis management or deploying your service only to realize the crisis has been resolved or something else now takes precedence. So pick your tools carefully and consider the no-code, low-code solutions as well. They might just be in the sweet spot between effort and quality you need to execute quickly. In the ML AI solutions, this is especially relevant. Many a time has there been a custom ML AI solution created only for someone to mention an existing service that could have been used, especially if the need is urgent. May you live in interesting times. I hope this has been helpful, and I'm so looking forward to hearing from you. What have you learned, and what can you share with us? Hashtag Glober Azure Virtual is the one to use to share this with us. If you did find this useful and exciting, do connect with me on Twitter and LinkedIn. Thank you and stay in touch. And especially if you are in the UK or Ireland, chances are we may yet see each other soon. Stay safe.